Potion cards are a limited collection of spells in Hearthstone that have a variety of one-dimensional effects. Over the years, despite not having any real relation or synergy with each other, Blizzard has printed enough cards with potion in their name to make a list on. So in this video, we'll be going over some of the best potion cards in Hearthstone. Number 10, we have the Pint-Size Potion. This 1-mana pre-spell gives every enemy minion -3 attack during this turn only. This card was actually the second ever card that subtracted attack, and was played just as much as Shrinkmeister, which is to say that they both almost never saw any play. Pint-Size was originally thought to be good in minion-heavy pre-stack, surprisingly, since the attack debuff put on enemies could lead to favorable traits. Like if you had Dark Cultist on board versus your opponent's Sorceress Apprentice, you could play Pint-Size, attack into the now 0 attack Apprentice, and take no damage on your Cultists. And the thinking was, the more minions you and your opponent had on board, the more value you could get off of this card by getting good trades off of your opponent's minions. The only issue was, a good aggro priest deck wouldn't be meta until nearly 3 years later. And by that point, Pint-Size was both out of rotation and long forgotten. Literally, the only niche this card ever had was in Arena, and as a niche pick off of a spell discovery effect. In Arena, the ideal situation of having lots of minions to minion combat was the bread and butter of that mode, which playing Pint-Size wasn't a question of if you could get away with value, but when. The only real deck that ever wanted to play Pint-Size Potion was some Dragon Priests, which was a mid-range deck that wanted to dominate the board by playing efficient minions and trading often. This version of Dragon Priest was successful for a while, but after that, Pint-Size became more and more obsolete as better and better versions were printed over the years. Despite seeing almost no play, Pint-Size Potion at least saw some competitive play, at least compared to the only 2 potions left off of this list, which is why Pint-Size Potion barely makes the number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Potion of Heroism. This 2-mana Paladin spell has the effect of giving a minion Divine Shield and drawing you a card. And a small quirk of this card is that in order for you to be able to draw a card from its effect, you need to give a minion Divine Shield, otherwise it can't be cast. As a side note, this is one of the only potions on this list that isn't from one of the Cabal classes, which were the classes in Mean Streets of Gadgetzan's expansion that got access to most of the potion cards on this list, and Kazakus. Anyways, this card really isn't that great as a buff, but was mostly played for its ability to let Paladins cycle through their deck. Throughout the years, Paladin has had many cheesy combo decks that required him to draw a few very specific, not easily searchable cards. The thing is though, Paladin has also had some of the worst card draw in the game, with most of them having to rely on weak neutral cards to help them. In recent years though, after Potion of Heroism rotated wild, some Control Paladin and Pure Paladin decks saw success with them. Control Paladin used Heroism to give them something to spend their mana on in the early game, and repeating its effects later on in the game with Immortal Prelate and Lynessa Sunsorrow. Likewise, Pure Paladin, which is a deck which benefits from only being made of Paladin cards, also used a small buff package with Hand of Adal, Potion, Prelate, and Lynessa to double dip on the buff effects too. Unfortunately, Potion never really took off in any real meta decks while it was allowed in Standard or in Wild, and was replaced usually in favor of Hand of Adal, which actually had to be nerfed because of how good it was. And at number 8, we have Fellfire Potion. This 6-mana Warlock simply deals 5 damage to all characters, both friendly and enemy ones. Fellfire Potion follows the familiar pattern of Fel corrupted cards negatively affecting itself or friendly characters in exchange for being overstated or mana efficient. And with compared to others similarly priced board clears, it's really not that bad. At the time this card was printed, Flamestrike only dealt 4 damage to all minions, and was long considered to be the benchmark for all good removal spells. And even for just 2 more mana, it dealt 2 more damage to all enemies like Hellfire, another long-time Warlock removal spell. The only issue was, at 6 mana, Fellfire Potion would come out far too late and deal too much damage for it to be relevant that often. You see, because of how the card is worded, even though it has the potential to deal 5 damage to your opponent's face, part of the cost was taking 5 damage yourself. And when you're playing this potion as a removal spell against aggro decks, having a massive board clear doesn't matter when you're also helping your opponent kill you. On top of that, it also cleared your minions, pretty much obliterating its chances of ever being played as a flexible board clear in mid-range or tempo Warlock decks. But during the expansion, when a majority of these potions were printed, one of the best decks in the game was Rito Warlock, which required you to run 30 unique cards in order to get 2 of its big payoff effects to go off. And because you had to run 30 unique cards, rather than 2 copies of 15 good cards like most other decks, their card quality had to suffer in some places. Fellfire Potion just happened to occasionally be played in Reno Lock as one of the worst cards in that deck, as a stronger Hellfire and cheaper Twisty Nether if they needed more board clear against Swarm decks. And at number 7, we have Volcanic Potion. This 3 mana mage spell simply deals 2 damage to all minions. Unlike Felfire Potion, this Volcanic Potion only deals damage to minions and not to both heroes. This is just another card that's completely outclassed by today's standards, and was briefly played as one of Mage's only cheap board clear spells. And really, when compared to nearly identical cards which were never played, like Dragon Wrath, it's almost a miracle that Volcanic Potion saw any play. The only reason why this card wasn't completely forgotten about on release was because it was one of the more efficient ways to deal with the infamous Pirate package, consisting of pre-nerf Buccaneer, South Sea Deckhand, and pre-nerf patches. This monster of a package lets you potentially put out 2-3 worth of stats on turn 1 and completely dominate the meta to the point where just about every aggro, tempo, and mid-range deck tried to run a Pirate package in it somehow. But because a turn 3 Volcanic Potion could just barely clear a small-time Buccaneer, patches, and some other small minions, it bought some slower mage decks just enough time to stabilize. The only reason it wasn't played more though was because paying 3 mana for a 2 damage board clear is pretty pitiful and couldn't even completely clear out a typical aggro board. Other comparable options at the time were Power Shot in Hunter and Consecration in Paladin, and even both of these cards were becoming obsolete. The only exception is that years later, Priest was given Breath of the Infinite, which is used basically as a Volcanic Potion in 95% of decks, but only because Priest has so few board clears. Mage, on the other hand, has some of the best damaging spells in the game, and there are a ton of small board clear options depending on what deck you want to build. For a while though, there's no denying that it was one of Mage's more important spells they used to survive the onslaught of early Pirate and aggro decks. And at number 6, we have Black Crystal Potion. This 4 mana Warlock Potion lets you destroy a minion, but also makes you destroy one of your mana crystals. This card, at first glance, seems like the worst potion on here, and in a vacuum, that's because it is. While spending 5 mana to destroy a minion was on the weaker side, there were a couple of cards that had this priced in. But what really made this card painful is that it permanently destroyed one of your mana crystals, meaning if you play this on turn 4, it would basically give you 1 less mana to play with until turn 10. This also meant that Black Crystal Potion, when played early in a game, was effectively a cost of 10 mana to destroy 1 minion. So, why was this ever played, considering other similar cards like Felguard never saw any play? Well, when you're in a life or death scenario and you just want to survive for a couple more turns, ruining your future turns doesn't really matter. For example, Phase Hunter and Aggro Demon Hunters don't care if they give their opponent a free mana crystal with Arcane Golem, if they can just swing in with it and kill your opponent with it. And for that same reason, if you just need to kill one of your opponent's big threats because they just went all in, then the drawback of Black Crystal Potion doesn't really matter. That's why Reno Warlock, the strongest deck in the format, picked up Black Crystal in case they needed a cheap removal spell against an aggro deck. Of course, by today's standards, Black Crystal is just a bad card, but when Reno Warlock was dominating the ladder, since there were no standard and wild formats yet, you could be sure to see this potion everywhere, even though it's just an objectively worse Assassinate, and completely outclassed by Plague of Flames. Black Crystal Potion deserves spawn this list for its inclusion just about every early version of Reno Warlock. And at number 5, we have Greater Healing Potion. This 4 mana pre-spell lets you restore 12 health to a friendly character. At first, this card may not seem that good, especially since a big healing card in Priest, a class known for their ability to efficiently heal, may seem redundant. But unlike most cards which only have the effect of restoring health, Greater Healing Potion was actually pretty competitively viable for a while. The thing you have to understand about healing cards in Hearthstone is that at some point, a card restores enough health to your hero where it can stop a lot of aggro decks' momentum. Take Reno Jackson, a card which restores your hero to full health while imposing a heavy deck restriction, and consider that he's still considered to be one of the best cards of all time. Basically, if you can heal a ton right after an aggro tempo, or a mid-range deck tries to rush you down, you've basically won. And if they waste all their cards and mana trying to kill you as fast as possible, and you're able to just completely heal off the damage they did, you'll have gained a massive card and mana advantage. That being said, Greater Healing Potion was a dream for slow turtle decks since it was both efficient for 4 mana, and let them survive for an ungodly amount of time. The infamous Big Priest loved this card for a long time, and was responsible for its annoyingly consistent competitive success in Wild. This deck basically aimed to stall until they could play Shadow Essence or Barnes, summon a mini version of one of the threats, and resurrect it over and over again with its full stats. But because Big Priest couldn't run any small minions, which would ruin their res pool, they had to rely on small removal spells and Greater Healing Potion to survive long enough to get their win conditions. Reno Priest even started running this card despite being one of the most heavy heal decks in the game, because aggro and burst damage was so prevalent at some points that Reno wasn't enough. And as sad as it is that you can't target enemies with it and make it into a 4 mana deal 12 damage with Soul Priest, Greater Healing Potion definitely deserves its spot at number 5 for how common it was for a couple of years. And at number 4, we have Potion of Polymorph. This 3-mana spell is a secret, or a type of spell which only triggers on your opponent's turn, and transforms the next minion your opponent plays into a 1/1 sheep. Secrets are Hearthstone's equivalent to counter spells in other card games, and are the only real way you can interact with your opponent during their turn. And although they trigger the first time their condition is met, meaning they can easily be played around, your opponent only knows if you played a secret and not which one it is. The idea behind most of them is that they generate value as your opponent plays suboptimally, as they test and play around each of the possible secret triggers, and there are a lot of them. And as the only one of the potions which isn't a spell, Potion was actually played a decent amount, despite being among the heavily saturated slot for secrets which trigger upon playing a minion. You see, this potion was the only one of the mage secrets which can deal with any single minion your opponent plays, which is important more than ever now with some decks that are built completely around their key minions. A well-timed Potion of Polymorph could either force your opponent to throw away a minion to get rid of it, or could win you the game on the spot, even to this day. Unfortunately, most players know by now that every mage secret can easily be diffused if you just play a small minion, small spell, or just any card you don't care about. And even though it was a decent secret, it really only saw play in some secret mages as a tech option, and in some Reno decks that really want to throw off their opponents. And at number 3, we have Dragonfire Potion. This 6-mana pre-spell deals 5 damage to all minions on both sides except for dragon minions. In almost every case, this card is just a better removal spell than Felfire Potion, and actually one of the better board clears in Priest. You see, every expansion, Blizzard always manages to print one mediocre board clear for Priest, which always manages to see play because of how desperately Priest needs board clears. Before Dragonfire was printed, the classic set gave Priest Holy Nova, which was a very expensive board clear that did pitiful damage. Goblin vs. Gnomes gave Priest Light Bomb, which only worked against high attack minions. And the League of Explorers gave Priest Excavate Evil, which really cost 1 more mana than it should have. All of these cards basically doomed Priest with some of the worst board clears in the game. That is, until the infamous Dragon package was released. This set not only gave Priest Dragonfire, it also printed the most mana efficient card at the time, which, wouldn't you know it, was also another board clear. And with these tools, Dragon Priest and Reno Priest became nearly impossible to swarm with wide boards. You see, although Dragonfire Potion and Felfire Potion look really similar, both costing and dealing the same amount of damage to all minions, there's a reason why one is so much higher on this list than the other. That's because Dragonfire didn't deal damage to your own hero, meaning the only cost you had to pay for a pretty consistent board wipe was for you to just play its normal mana cost. The only drawback, of course, is that it didn't affect dragons, but this was almost never an issue because dragons aren't that aggressive or go wide on board. The potion even managed to find success in Wild after it rotated out of Reno Priest's premier board clear, since almost every aggro deck's minions weren't dragons and had 5 or less health. Of course, as time passed on, Priest has actually been given some of the best board clears of all time, and yet Dragonfire still saw play for its reliability compared to other cheaper options. Reno Priest, and by extension Dragonfire Potion, doesn't see as much play as it did in the past, but when it did, it was the best deck in Wild for months, which is no small feat in Hearthstone's strongest format. And at number 2, we have Potion of Madness. This 1-mana pre-spell lets you take control of an enemy minion with 2 or less attack for 1 turn. But what it doesn't explicitly say is that you also get to attack with it while it's under your control. This card was great and was also one of the best arena cards ever. Potion of Madness is insanely efficient for what it does, because in the best case, you can go 2 for 1 in card advantage while gaining board control all for just 1 mana. For example, if your opponent had a 2-1 and a 3-2, you could use Potion to clear 2 of your opponent's minions, while still having enough mana to play your own. Of course, you can always use it to damage 2 of your opponent's minions, but you don't get to keep the minion you stole forever. But because Potion gave the minion temporary charge, it was also used in Inner Fire decks. The main combo of these decks revolved around having a very high health minion to stick on the board, buffing its health up a bunch of times, doubling its health with Divine Spirit, setting its attack to be equal to its health with Inner Fire, and attacking your opponent for over 30 damage. This combo really isn't as complicated as it seems, and in some cases can even be completed before turn 5. And with more and more support for this deck, it's actually one of the best decks as of writing this video. It just so happens that in older versions of this deck, they also included a potion package in case you wanted to use one of your opponent's minions. The basic health buff inner combo was the same, except you would use Wave of Apathy to set the attack of all your opponent's minions to 1, steal your opponent's highest health minion, do the combo on it, and kill your opponent with their own minion. And if it weren't for the next potion on this list, which was featured in even more broken combos, Potion of Madness could have made it the number 1 spot on this list. Number 1, we have Potion of Illusion, another one of the only non-Cabal class potions. This 4-mana spell, available to Rogue and Mage, adds a 1/1 copy of all minions on board to your hand. And while it may seem strange that such a seemingly slow and expensive card is at the top of this list, Potion of Illusion is here because its ability to sustain combo potential. While this card was used in a ton of Reno Mage and value-focused Mage decks as a way to get extra copies of their high-value minions, it actually saw more success in Rogue as one of their few dual-class cards in the game. Fairly recently, Potion of Illusion was a core part of Pillager Rogue, which was arguably the best deck in Wild. This combo revolved around Spectral Pillager, a minion which dealt damage equal to the number of other cards you had played that turn. After drawing a ton of cards in the previous turns and setting up a Spirit of the Shark, you could very easily play your entire hand on turn 5, deal over 50 damage, and still sometimes have mana left over. This was the high roll scenario, of course, but killing your opponent by turn 8 was considered to be very slow with this deck. And what truly made Pillager Rogue disgusting was with Potion of Illusion, you could just add 1 mana copies of your entire combo back to your hand, and do it all again on your next turn. The only reason this deck didn't completely dominate Wild was because of how hard it was to pilot optimally, meaning it actually was only really terrifying in higher legend ranks. Potion of Illusion definitely deserves the number 1 spot on this list because no other potion has seen as much success or prevalence since their printing. And in that it was released during some of the strongest states of the game ever, and it's no wonder that Potion of Illusion deserves to be called the best collectible potion card in Hearthstone. Alright, and that's the list. If you think we missed any other cards that should have been on this list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, let us know down in the comments.